You are at the co-hosted luncheon from Development Executive Roundtable and the Foundation Center. We are here to hear from Aidan Lukomnik talking about integrated communication strategies for nonprofits. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Michelle from the Foundation Center.
Thank you, Christine. Just wanted to reiterate her welcome for all of those here in the room, as well as those who may be watching on live stream. We're so excited to have Aidan here with us today to talk about integrated communication strategies. So just to give you a little format, just to let you know what the format is of the program, we'll start with some questions that both Aidan and I have prepared ahead of time, and then we're going to open it up to everyone here. So for those of you in the room, if you want to just ask your questions over here, please use the mic so the people on the live stream can hear you. You won't be seen by those people on the live stream, so rest assured you're somewhat anonymous, although it would be nice to know your name and what organization you work with when you ask your question. And for those of you on the live stream, if you have questions, feel free to just put them into the chat box, and we'll be sure to get the questions up here, and we'll ask Aidan directly on your behalf. So without further ado, we'll start our program. Thank you, Aidan, for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, so we know that you're here representing Hotwire as the head of social impact for North America.
Absolutely.
And so much experience with organizations, nonprofit organizations doing communications. Would you like to start with giving us a background on your experience working with nonprofits and also how Hotwire fits into that?
Yeah, absolutely. And my chair's angled this way, so I'm going to cheat back a little bit so I can see all of you. So I'm Aidan Lukomnik. I'm the head of social impact for Hotwire Global Communications. We're an integrated communications firm with offices in 8 different countries. And what it means to be the head of social impact is that I get to work with nonprofits, social enterprises, and foundations to help tell their stories and do the work that we know is so critical, but often is not the essential work. How did I get started? Well, I am actually a transplant to the Bay Area. I'm from New York City, and I grew up in a Jewish family. Judaism, there's an idea called tikkun olam and tzedakah, which is giving back to the community. So I would say it was kind of in my DNA. My parents definitely instilled it in me. They might be watching. I wouldn't say hit me over the head with it, but definitely instilled me with it. Definitely taught me the importance of, if you have something, there are others that may not have that, and it's important to give back, and it's actually a critical, fundamental moral good, and it should be in your DNA. So I think that's where it started from. Now that I work with Hotwire, Hotwire is actually the combination of 2 agencies. It was Eastwick Communications here in the Bay Area and Hotwire PR in the UK and US. And Eastwick, when we were here, had been here for 25 years, and we actually worked with nonprofits and foundations in sort of one-off matters. We would see where there was synergies and where it was possible to work together, and we would then work with them because it's amazing and it's important, and our founders knew that giving back to the community and sort of growing the community was essential. Hotwire did the same thing in the UK and in Europe, where we're based. And so it was kind of a match made in heaven. We already had the programs. We had already done the work. We already had all these amazing clients that we worked with. And when I came on, my background was in nonprofit and political communications. And so we combined all of this into a dedicated department meant to work together.
Great, thank you for that introduction. So we're talking today about integrated communications, and I think that many people kind of know what it is, but maybe we should have a standard definition before we continue on. So in your words, can you help define what you mean by integrated communications?
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone you talk to in marketing is going to have a slightly different definition of integrated communications. For me, it is the sum of all of the ways you are seen and making sure that your story comes across that. So that could be from me talking to you in person and having your employees know what your story is. That could be, I have business cards that have your branding and your story sort of coming through them. It could be your swag, but it can also be, and is mainly referred to as, your online properties. So how does your website reflect your story? Your media relations, and then your digital engagement. So how does your brand come through every way you're being seen externally and internally?
Thank you for that definition. And one of the things we said that we would talk about today is how integrated communications can help boost volunteers, annual donations, and drive action. Can you give us a story about working with a nonprofit where you had, what's the case study there and how it has played out that actually integrated communications helps support that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you two really quick ones, and we'll probably touch on them more in depth later. 2041 is an advocate to help protect the Antarctic. So I didn't know this until last year, but the Antarctic is protected under international treaty until the year 2041, hence the name. And it was started by Robert Swan, who's the first person to ever walk to both the North Pole and the South Pole. He says, and I quote, "I'm the only person stupid enough to do it." But their mission is to engage with the generation that will be rewriting the international treaty and help explain how important it is to protect the Antarctic, both for the Antarctic's own sake and also for global climate change and how the Antarctic helps sort of save the environment. So they did the first ever, they went on the first ever fully renewable trek to the South Pole, from the edge of the Antarctic to the geographic South Pole, and they knew they needed to engage people who were my age. I hate the word millennials, but under 25, under 30, because those are the people who will be rewriting or starting to rewrite the treaties. So we were able to engage them with social, mainly Facebook and Instagram, but also looking at Twitter, and sort of get them new participants, engage the participants they already had, and sort of drive action and awareness of this plight. Another one, which has a sort of more direct business case, is we worked with a major medical nonprofit who's doing research. And December, as you all know, is critical fundraising time. And we worked with them. They had already had some digital campaigns last year, 2016. We worked with them in December of 2017 to help boost their donations via digital channels. So from paid social, Google AdWords, and organic social, we were able to boost their return 78% and get them a 320% return on investment only through social means. So this is just part of their entire marketing mix, but we were able to actually increase their end of year budget by purely online channels.
Wow, that's pretty remarkable. Since we're talking about social media, maybe we'll dive a little bit further into that. But before we do that, I think it's important to start to, on that higher level, talk about brand, as you were bringing up before. And I'm interested in just what you think about how one should be communicating a brand. If brand should be who you are now or what you're aspiring to, and how do you balance between those two?
Yeah. So Barbara Bates, who is the global CEO of Hotwire Global Communications, has this saying that you have to tell someone something 18 times before it makes sense, before it even sinks in. I was talking to another development professional yesterday, and they said, in development, we say 7 times. You have to say it a lot. So to go from where you are now to where you want to be, you have to communicate where you want to be a lot more than where you are now. For your brand, it should often be more aspirational. Yes, you have to talk about what the services you provide are now and how you've helped, and sort of, especially around year-end, what services you've provided, especially for grants. But it's also, what are you trying to do? What's that end goal, right? Because it all comes down to that end goal and what that means for who you are overall. So I would say it's always more aspirational, and continue to talk about the aspirational, because only when you are beginning to get sick of it is anyone else starting to understand what that is. Honestly, I work on 4 to 5 different clients at a time, and I can say the same thing over and over and over again, and I know what it is, and my client knows what it is, and everyone in the room knows what it is. They're saying, "Oh, we're tired of it." It's like, great, that's what it's starting to get through, because really that's the only way other people will see it. One thing before we go on, please tweet, please engage on social. I'm happy to have you guys on your phones taking photos of this while we're doing it. You can tweet at @Lukumnik or at Hotwire Global, and I'll see it. I won't bring out my phone right in a second, but I'll see it afterwards.
And also at FC San Francisco.
Yes, absolutely.
And then DER, I'm not sure what the DER, right there. At DER?
No.
No? Oh, okay. Never mind. Not Twitter. For DER, but, they're going to get on Twitter as we
exactly.
talk about integrated
And
communication.
the importance of it.
Absolutely. So let's go there. But, okay, one more question before that. Just we're talking, social media or digital communication seems to be where we're going with it. But what role does print still play in this very digital world? Is there a place for it?
Yeah. Last year there was an article that made its way around the PR circles that was "The press release is dead, long live the press release." And it really does address this fundamental shift to a more digital world. I think there always has to be a mix, though, because when we look at marketing and communications, we have a paid, earned, owned, and shared methodology where you could be in all of those places. And media is one of your top referrers. How you get people to you and how you get people to know about is media is important. It's critical, I would say. It's not the only thing. You should also be sharing on blogs and social, which we'll get into. But it's the best way to have person-to-person communication at scale, right? It's essentially someone referring you to someone else. And we know that that kind of referral is the most effective way of doing marketing and communications, but you can't do that at scale or very effectively at scale. You can't have I can't have a conversation in a year with 10 million people. Someone at Stanford Social Innovation or Nonprofit Times could get up to that level. So I think there is still a strong role for media in a new digital world.
Thank you for that. Just to follow up to that in terms of media, so much media is still online. So when I'm thinking print, I'm also thinking about, there's an investment cost to print, right? That, we've been so lucky in the digital world up until this point where so much has been open and free, which I believe is changing, and we'll certainly talk about that. But in terms of, allocation of resources, et cetera, in terms of, do you spend more time on your, case statement, printed case statement, or, keep it simply online?
Yeah, I would say definitely for fundraising, letter campaigns are still really effective, especially for if your audience is a little bit older. They're a great way to raise funds. For creative assets, these are non-digital, right? I think they're great uses of creative assets. I think it really depends. It's hard to answer because it depends on how often they're being used. If you have a stockpile of PDFs in a closet that's from 2015 and no one's ever looked at them, probably shouldn't spend time there next year. It often happens in nonprofits that end-of-year reports are that way. Maybe put that online. But things that are working, and it always comes down to measurement of what is working, should be kept. And I think even though we're moving to an online world, we're actually seeing that letters are coming back because so few people are sending letters. So when you have a really effective letter campaign, either for engaging in advocacy or fundraising, it actually has great return on investment, and we've seen it do really, really well. So it's not just a digital world, it's a combined world.
Thank you. Well, let's dive a little deeper into that digital world. Certainly a lot of sub-channels within that. And so I'm curious as to what you think the right mix might be, in terms of what social media platforms should you be on, especially with the recent news of the moment. And what other ways should you be engaging digitally?
Yeah. The recent news. Wow. So who here has heard about the recent news of Cambridge Analytica? Great. About 90% of people. I'm going to pause for 1 second there. Actually, no, I'll just dive right into that. What's happening with Facebook is not unique to Facebook. It's any digital channel. account-based targeting, which is taking someone's data, finding out what you like, and like targeting them, or knowing someone's email and targeting them, is really, really effective. It's also kind of sketch if you're not someone who agreed to that. So there are definitely ethical ways to do it. One of my friends who worked on the Obama campaign said, look, we did this, right? There was an outrage when we did it. We did it with opt-in, not without anyone knowing. But we did the same thing, so we can't overreact. At the same time, I think there will be massive ramifications for digital channels. I think there will be more regulation, which I think is actually good. And I hope, my sincere hope, is that Americans especially, but people around the world, wake up to the importance of data privacy and actually push for more data privacy and regulations. Because a lot of people I know, even my age, say, oh, I don't have anything to hide. Why should I even bother? It takes more time to turn data off and then on and hide my email. But it is really critical information, and things like what Cambridge Analytica can do happen all the time at a less scale. I'm going to put a button on that until questions, because I'm sure there will be some questions about it. On the question of where should you be, it really depends on your audience. I would argue that you should be on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn automatically. I think they're the big three. They have been for a while. There are cases where you shouldn't be on LinkedIn, right? If you're not talking to anyone who's older than me, probably shouldn't be on LinkedIn. But generally, if you have a wide range of donors and activists or individuals you're working with, those three are a good set. After that, it starts getting complicated because it depends how much time you want to spend on each one. If you're a arts organization, you're probably going to be on Instagram. But there's also a new social media network called Vero that's coming out that a lot of artists are moving from Instagram to Vero on. The question is your audience there, right? Have they moved there? Are they actually actively engaging there? And what are they doing there? The other question is, what is you want your audience to do? So if you want fundraising, Vero isn't really set up for that yet. Really, it's still Facebook and Instagram. If you want to drive awareness of what you're doing, maybe it's there. And if you want to drive action, it's also on email or direct communication. So I think it's really where is your audience and what do you want them to do? And there are a lot of great benchmarks of sort of what the demographics of different people on different sites are. So we know Facebook has actually moved much older. The average age is like 35, 40. We know that Twitter is a pretty good demographic, but it doesn't have the same reach. We know Instagram is younger, Snapchat's younger. I didn't mention Snapchat. There are a lot of good reasons to use Snapchat. A lot of my clients don't choose to, based on just sort of who the demographics are and the age challenges, especially around legal ramifications, if you're advertising to people under 17. But there are good reasons to be there. So it's really audience, what you want them to do, will they do it from that channel?
Thank you for that. As we're still talking about digital, I'm curious about how you feel about expanding your social media footprint. I mean, know that there are some organizations out there where they'll ask their employees to help on their behalf. Certainly in Foundation Center, we do that too. And I'm just curious as to, is that a best practice in terms of expanding reach and using personal accounts for that purpose?
Yes, do that. Don't force anyone to do that, because that's not right. But give the option for employees to expand your reach. Everyone has their own network, and they are reaching people outside of your network, most likely. So it's a really effective mode of broadening your reach. A lot of companies tend to be a little scared by that, or a lot of organizations be a little scared. Trust your employees. Give them 1 or 2 posts. Tell them you don't have to do this, but you can. It's a great way to expand reach. The one channel, sorry, I realized I didn't talk about was email. Email marketing is really amazing, and you should use it. And how often and what you do with it, we can get into. I think we are planning on it, but you should be there as well as social.
Thank you. And just staying on the social media side, even before what happened this week with Cambridge Analytica, Facebook had changed their algorithm, which, for a lot of people who have spent a lot of time and effort building that, great, following, harder to get seen by them. Google too is, changes with AdWords, et cetera. I guess the question is, how do you keep up with all of those changes? And then the follow-up question to that would be, how do you know that these changes are actually going? How do you make sure that you're part of that?
Yeah, so keeping up with algorithm changes, as you said, it's not just a Facebook thing. It's also Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat, all of them, Instagram, make changes pretty regularly. I would say there are at least 2 or 3 major changes to each platform every year, and it does throw you off. So how you find out about them is a lot easier than how you deal with them. How you find out about them, the platforms will make a email blast about it, or they'll make a blog post, or you'll sort of hear about it on social. There are a lot of great social chats, one of which is like Adweek's chat. Buffer has one, but usually there are ways that the platforms themselves put out like a notification about it. And they'll even give you like an in-bar. Facebook gave a recent in-bar notification. How you stay on top of it is a more challenging question. We've seen with most platforms that it's moving to massive pay-to-play. So from what it started with 10 years ago with organic, you could just post something and people will see it. It'll be shown to a lot of people. It's dropped drastically. Organic reach is now well below 1% for most of your content, meaning people outside of your network won't get reached. That's Facebook specifically. It's a little bit higher on other platforms, but it's dropped down. And that's because of the algorithm changes and because what you said, it's moving from a free platform to a paid platform. On how to stay on top of them, it really is test and learn. There's no magic bullet, unfortunately. It's a lot of time spent thinking about what worked, trying that again, and if it doesn't work, trying something else, and then finding what works and keeping doing that thing until it doesn't, which is very annoying, but unfortunately there's no other way of doing it than that, and that's sort of the best practice way. That doesn't have to take up a ton of time. It could take half an hour a day, right? You'll get to what works faster if you do it more.
Thank you. I think a follow-up question for that is, that sounds so dismal, right? 1% of reach. And so, even a half an hour with, for a time-strapped, resource-strapped nonprofit, how much time, should one be investing knowing that only 1% of their, will be seeing it anyway?
Yeah. Well, that's 1% at a time, right? If you take 1% over and over and over again, you actually do get a pretty great reach. And it's a cheaper way than trying to reach 1,000 people a day on your own, as going out and shaking hands. So I would say at minimum, my recommendation would be to spend half an hour. Have one person write a post it on your channels, and see what happens. I would recommend that the better case for that is an hour a day and having you actually go through and make lots of different posts. My recommended suggestion, how many times you post and when you post changes organization to organization. But I would say 3 posts on Twitter is about good. Once a day on LinkedIn and Facebook, and then if you're going into Snapchat, you have to be creating a ton of content. That's one of the reasons a lot of nonprofits don't use it, is you have to be creating content consistently. Once a day on Instagram as well is sort of a pretty good cadence. So at minimum, half an hour, better an hour, best have a marketing department, which would be ideal. I know it's not possible all the time, but have someone dedicated to it throughout. That's really the best way to do it. And it doesn't have to be their full job. It can be half of their job. But as often people are development and communications, it can be half your job to do social planning and posting.
Great. Just a follow-up question for that. Thanks for this prescription. I think sometimes prescription is really good to have. But one of the things I'm wondering about that content. So do you recommend same post on Facebook as you do on Twitter, as you do on LinkedIn, or do you see, specific for each channel?
Again, it gets down to how much time you have. My recommendation is always slightly different, using the same content, but in different ways, right? It's going to be shorter on Twitter with hashtags. It's going to be slightly longer on Instagram. using more hashtags, right? Average hashtags is like 15 on Instagram, so you can use a lot more. And it's going to be slightly more professional's tone on LinkedIn. So it's the same content, and you can use what you've written but modified it. And that's actually really a great way to spend that time effectively.
Great, thank you. So when we were talking about what social media platforms you should be on, we were talking about audience. Where is your audience? So I'm wondering if we could just take a step back and talk about audience, and also, the fact that for each of those channels, you're approaching the audience in a different way. But can you help people, all of us, understand how does one define an audience in terms of, we know it's not everyone, but how do you make sure that you get those, quote, customers in mind, and what does that look like in that process?
Yeah, I would argue that development professionals are probably some of the best people at this because you're talking to the people you're talking to anyway. Your audience are the people who are going to help you achieve your goals. So if that is major donors, that's the specific audience. If that is individual donors and you want to get more of them, you can start looking at who has currently donated before and what people look like that, right? What kind of demographics look like that. And then if you're looking at volunteers or people who are going to do a legislative action day or a park cleanup day, those are also your sort of volunteers that already exist, and sort of working on finding people who look like them on their demographics and tastes. I would say for new nonprofits, right, net new, never done anything before, don't really know anything, it's a lot harder, but you really want to think about those needs, right? Why would someone want to come and help you? Why would someone donate to you? Is it because they have the thing that you are talking about or are in that group you're trying to help? Is it because they know someone who is in that group? So you can start building out audiences that way by looking at who you already have and trying to find other people like them. That's usually the best way to do it.
Thank you. One of the, quote, audiences I think that it seems like has become more important, especially in social media, are the influencers. So the idea that it's not just your donors, but who, an influencer could be a donor, but, the idea that there are others out there, maybe someone with a larger following that you want to follow you, or, some thought leader within the industry that you're in to get noticed. Do you have any strategies for how to reach those influencers?
Yes. So the best way I would say to reach an influencer is to listen to them first. So let's say I'm the influencer. That's bad. That's kind of nihilistic. Let's say Michelle's the influencer you want to influence. You would see what Michelle is posting online. Usually influencers have a big following on some platform. Doesn't have to be social. Could be their website. Could be their blog. But you would see what you're posting. You would read it pretty in-depthly. I would say go back about 3 months, read through your content, and just start following you, right? What do you keep posting? What topics are you interested in? What are you writing about? For me, that would be nonprofit communications and integrated communications, marketing, PR. And then you could start looking at what Michelle is writing and start tagging her in things that are relevant, right? Sharing content that she would find interesting. And if Michelle has, the ability, if you have the ability to tag Michelle or put her in something, you could send content over and say, hey, I thought you would find this interesting. That allows the influencer to sort of see who you are. They're not going to read everything you post, right? Because there are a lot of people that are probably trying to do this with them. But you start to build up a following. And then what happens is you can start to actually direct message them or find their email and send them a message and say, hey, we'd like to co-create some content, right? We have this idea. We think this topic would be really good for you. Would you like to work with us? And by that, you get it in. You get to work together. You get to see if this person really does help you achieve your goals. And you can co-create some interesting content. The one thing I will say about influencers is the game has also changed. Most of social has changed, but it used to be you can email someone and be like, hey, I want to create this blog with you. Do you want to do this? And most people would say yes because it's free exposure. And it's something that isn't super hard to do, right? It's somewhat of a lift, but it's not super hard. it's now moved to pay to play, where most people who you're asking to do something for you see it as a job, which is completely fair, but also it means that you have to budget some amount of money for influencer engagement at first. It's not always that way, but it has moved a lot more to pay to play.
Thank you for that. It seems like everything is turning to pay to play.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, and it's been such a wonderful world where it hasn't been, but I know it's changing now. We talked. You mentioned it a little bit, and I'm just curious in terms of how we're doing this work. You know, we're all mission related. We all are working to support a cause, and more it seems that advocacy has become part of our job of making sure that we can achieve our missions for the people that we're serving or the issue we're serving. And I'm curious, just in the world of integrated communications, brand, et cetera, how does advocacy fit in, and are there best practices or pitfalls you should avoid, et cetera?
Yeah. Well, the best thing about working with nonprofits and foundations is that they have a story and they have a mission. And sometimes in communications, that's the hardest thing to find. And you all in the room and online are working with organizations that already have that, which is the nice thing. A lot of that is around advocacy. We know there's been a lot of research in this. 66% of consumers, and yeah, it's not nonprofit donors, but consumers in America want organizations to say where they stand, right? Like, what do you believe? This is because there's been a really huge lack of trust and sort of a fall in trust across all organizations. It used to just be government, but it's nonprofits, it's corporations, it's sort of anything that has the institution behind it, there's a lack of trust in. One way to get back that trust is to say where you stand. So advocacy is actually a really great tool in communications. It's also a really great tool in achieving your goals, right? And so I would I would say absolutely be advocates, but be advocates in a way that makes sense to your organization. Don't jump onto everything. Find what that red thread, we like to call it, that thread that connects you to that issue is, and really advocate around that issue. If I'm working in a hunger nonprofit, I might not jump on an education piece. I might if there's a direct connection, if it's, school food and meals in school, but it's not necessarily connected. So definitely advocate for your mission area and make sure that you can achieve that first in order to have a really strong advocacy program.
Thank you. We have so many questions we prepared, and I really want everyone to have a chance to ask them. So I'm going to give everyone an opportunity to think about that question. Write it down if you're watching live stream, or if you're not, just think about it in your head. I'll ask another question, and then I would just ask anyone who wants to ask a question to just start a line over by the microphone here, and we'll get to your questions in just a second. And I was at this wonderful talk yesterday with the BMA Black Man Achievement Awards and Black Man Achievement group, and one of the things I thought the moderator did a great job was to define what a question was, and the idea that a question is usually brief and usually has and definitely has a question mark at the end, and that there's no thesis leading up to it, and that it helps everyone in the room. So I thought that was a great way to state it. So just a reminder what a question is. And now on to mine. We've been talking a lot about digital media. I do want to ask one other question about that. We did talk about email and the importance of email, and I'm wondering if you could just give an idea, some best practices around how do you use email, what's too much, what's too little, and how does it fit into the whole mix?
Yeah. So I would say an email a day is way too much. If you're getting an email from any organization or agency every day, you're going to drop that real fast. So around timing, I would say we like to do an email a week if we're in, fundraising season, just to remind people. But I would say a monthly email, a bi-monthly email is a pretty good, here's what's going on in our news. here's what's happening, here are the important things. And then you could have campaign-specific things. So if you're, for my example, I work with a major research nonprofit. They have research breakthroughs, right? Those are not, they're not really planned on a monthly schedule, I would say. So if something happens that is really relevant to your audience, yeah, send an email. Absolutely. You'll also start knowing when you're sending too many emails, when people start responding back or unsubscribing at higher rates. That's when you should lay off the gas. But in general, I mean, I used to work on a political campaign. That political campaign will go unnamed, but I live in San Francisco, so I'll let you guess which side it was on. And I still get emails from them pretty much weekly. And it's slightly annoying, but it's not annoying enough for me to unsubscribe and like cut that network off, right? So that's the differentiator is it might be slightly annoying, but it's not going to turn people away. So I would say an email a week is a good one. An email every month, if you're not in fundraising season, is another one.
Any strategies on how to grow that email list?
Yes, I think any event you do should have an email sign-in, or you should ask for people's information. So any in-person event, any online event, you all registered for this, so how your information should be captured that way. I would also say you could drive people from social to email. It's always great to get them deeper down into like the funnel. We like to see social for awareness, and then as you actually get one-on-one communication, because I have your information now and I can reach out to you, it's a lot of a deeper connection, and it's a lot easier to get people to either take action or donate. So those are two ways. You could also have email signups high up on your website. We haven't really talked about web properties, but having things above the fold, even if though we're on like a mobile world, having an email sign up really easily available to get more information is a really good strategy of growing that email list. And finally, you can put some money behind it. If you have money, I know that Google AdWords has a ton of grants for nonprofits. I say totally take advantage of those. They're there for you, and they're really effective when you use them well. And so you could do some email sign up that way.
Great, thank you. It seems like no one has questions, so I'm going to keep going. And if you
Oh,
do,
wait,
I'm
there are
sorry.
two.
I don't even see anybody. Okay, please come ask your questions.
Hi, Aiden. I had a question around Giving Tuesday. It
Yes.
seems like that is a area that many nonprofits have been forced to participate because they feel that
Yes.
otherwise they'll be left out. But many of us are strapped for communications experts. What would you suggest as either a starting place, or should we even participate?
Yeah, Giving Tuesday is a great one because it is a lot of people feel forced to participate because it's such a big day. I will say on the positive side of Giving Tuesday, you can raise a lot of funds on it. It is really an impactful day. On the negative side, you don't have to go all in, right? Like if you don't have time, if you don't have that expertise, don't go all in. You could change your website a little bit to have a banner that says, it's Giving Tuesday, can you give us a little bit more than you normally would? You could have one email that goes out, maybe a tweet or two or a couple of social posts. But you could definitely take a light touch to Giving Tuesday, especially if you don't have the resources. I would say there is always a risk that someone donates to a different organization. We don't like to see ourselves in competition because nonprofits are doing so good, but nonprofits are doing good work and everyone is doing different good work. But when there's a scarcity of resources, there does come to be a little bit of a competition. So you don't have to participate. You can, I would say, don't say like, oh, we're going to do Giving Wednesday, because then you'll be out on the edge, right? But don't feel the need to participate.
Hi, I'm Eileen Rice from the Shanti Project. I'm wondering, sort of from the perspective of nonprofits that are smaller and have to justify their budgets for communications, what tools specifically you use to track your success across platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So for measurement, Google Analytics is your go-to. It can be complicated, but it's free. It's really powerful, and you get to understand what is exactly happening on your website. I would say the key thing about measurement, no matter what tool you use, is set clear goals that are easy to measure. So if you want to increase the number of donors by 10%, you don't have to pay attention to impressions and clicks and website visit. You're paying attention to how many donors you have. So really set like 3 goals max. What I've seen happen all too often is everyone's like, oh, I want to measure this. There, you can measure that. You can measure impressions. You can measure how many people are on my site. Stop. Take a breath. It's going to be okay. Measure 3 things maximum. Those are your core things, and do that. On social scheduling, if you're thinking about tools, Buffer is a great one. It's free to use. Hootsuite is also free to use. Kissmetrics has a couple of tools that are free, as does Simply Measured, giving free advertising. But I love those tools. Simply Measured is actually one of my favorite tools to use, and it gives you really great analysis of they have demos that you can use of each of your channels.
Hi, I'm Layla from Action for Nature, and I know we've talked a little bit about social strategies, and there is no magic bullet about of success. But if there is any specific social strategies that you've taken that have been really successful to get donations specifically, to have people take that action to actually donate, even at a really small level, like we saw with the Obama campaign, a lot of that came from grassroots, and Bernie Sanders, a lot of it just came from $2 to $5 of people donating. If there is a specific strategy you can talk about that we can get people to actually just donate?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing, and I'll say this is a learning from my own experience, is make your ask really, really clear. Sometimes, like, I get nervous asking for money. It's just like a weird thing in the U.S. We don't like to ask for money. It's just ingrained in our culture. Make your ask really clear. Say donate now, right? Or we need your donations. Whatever that rationale is, you're going to have to define that for your own organization. But we ran a campaign recently where we were trying to do cutesy things like, hey, take action, or like make a difference, which are really good words and really good action verbs, but they don't really get people to donate. And that was something we found that was different than any other action that we had run campaigns for. Donations specifically have to be very clear on the action you need to take. So I would say write social posts that say have donation in their title or in the copy.
Hi. So I also appreciated the specificity of the hour or half hour a day on social rule. And we talked about the content aspect of that. I wonder if you have a similar prescription for the follow-up on tracking whether or not that content is a success. Kind of like, if you have limited time and resources, what is the one thing to pay attention to? Is it reach across the board? And that's my question.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great one because it comes in a lot. I think that it's actually clicks. And clicks to your website is generally what I think. Now, there might be videos where, right, you don't have a click through or you don't do something, but I think it's more impactful to get someone onto your owned property that is your own and has your messaging and has the ability to donate and you have the ability to sign up to an email list than anything else. It's harder, but I would say if you're going to look at one thing, have it be URLs and click through. And that's how I would determine what content is doing the best. Now, I would also encourage you to share some not owned content. So click through on that content also can show you what kind of topics are working. So if you're in healthcare and you're talking about a new breakthrough in 3D printing of artificial limbs, which is super interesting, and that does really well, you could find, okay, that's the content that's working. It doesn't matter that it's on Time or New York Times or Huffington Post. That's the content that works for my audience.
Hi, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit around what you guys said at the beginning, tweet, et cetera, et cetera. What are the strategies we should be employing when we're in events, and how do we know if those are successful around social?
Can you define
so we're
that?
having a gala with 300 people in the room. how do we make sure that we've covered the bases for the social during the event, and how do we know that's successful? How do we evaluate the strategy's success?
Got it. So I think there are two things there. The first is having your social icons on everything, like everywhere. If that's, most people have a gala book where you have donors, have it on the front of that with like the hashtag for your event. It's also having it on any slides you're projecting or anything you're projecting is actually having that. Doing what I did, where I actually learned from an organization I went to, and saying, hey, I want you to tweet here, right? Like, we want you to be social and get involved. That's really effective because a lot of people will want to, but not know if they're allowed to. And so just giving that opportunity to say, yes, please do, is a great way to do it. And finally, something that I will be totally honest, I was a Coro fellow. I love Coro Northern California, but they did really well, is having a screen that actually shows all of the tweets that are coming through. I say tweets, this could be any social platform. For most live events, Twitter is the best because you get live feedback. But you could use a really free tool called Tweetfall, which actually brings in all of the mentions of a certain hashtag or a certain word segment so that you could actually display it. So what they did is they did a first round of fundraising at the beginning, had speeches, brought up that screen and saw everyone who was fundraising, and you could tweet how much you were fundraising or how much you were donating, and then it showed it, and that actually encouraged people to donate more. So not only are you getting that reach on social, you're also achieving something else.
Hi, I'm Pat with St. Anthony's. I have more of a structural question. I hope this makes sense. What does the communication manager's role, or whoever the head of the marketing communication department is, look like in an organization that has a successful integrated marketing? Because we struggle with what that role is. How would you define it? What do they need to have?
That is a brilliant question.
That's the core of what we're struggling with.
Yeah, I would say that more than they should have the skills on the channels, but more than that, they should be a integrator. So for heads of marketing that I've seen work well at nonprofits, it is being able to know what is happening in every department and having those relationships in every program, in development, with your executive director. That is sort of the core skill internally that makes a really great head of marketing or communications. I would also say that there might be something else structurally that's not just a marketing problem, right? Where it's you need to have really clear understanding of what you're going towards and having everyone aligned on your brand vision and your brand mission, along with what's actually happening, right? Like, it's Tuesday. What is happening next week? Or as of today, it's almost the end of March. What's happening in April and May. So having planning sessions that everyone or every head of department can come to actually say, here's what's happening, makes it is really essential for a good head of marketing or head of communications. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it helps. Thanks.
So my question is not really about social media, but about print media
Yes,
and
please.
other online media. What would you say is new or different right now about press releases? I've been getting some different feedback from people like, oh, you would never include a PDF as an attachment, like it has to be able to be opened immediately on a journalist's phone. So do you have any information on how press releases have changed and what is the most up-to-date?
Yeah, absolutely. And if any of I'm trained as a digital marketer, which is why I talk mainly about digital. My media relations colleagues in Hotwire Global might yell at me for this, but I think what we work on together is making press releases really snappy. Journalists are writing like 4, 5, 6 articles a day, which in my head is crazy. Like, that's, I don't know how you would do that. I have a lot of respect for people who do. So making it something that is super important. Why do I care? What is it going to get me as a journalist, right? Like, what's the story I'm going to write? So instead of saying, hey, would you like an intro? Here's who I have. Here's what or here's my executive director. They have 25 years in this subject. Here's why it's important. If you want to learn more, we've attached another document, right? But just inside of the actual email and inside of the subject line, making it clear to the reporter why that's important. The other thing is, that's for press releases. For general media relations, I would say offering up commentary on things that you're not known for, or like things that you're known for, but isn't your program, right? So offering commentary if you're an immigration advocate or on the current laws, right? It's not your program, but it's something that's in your field and is a really great way to make introductions to those reporters that you could then send your press releases to.
Hi. So my question is mainly about like the ratio of asking. So knowing that Twitter, Facebook, et cetera, create this chronological list of all the content that you've posted and that your audience is interacting with it in a particular way. It can't really be segmented in quite the same way that emails can. Like, what is the right ratio of like program content, FYI updates to like actual hard asks for various channels, and what does that look like? How is it different for like most of the year versus end of year giving?
Yeah. So that's also a great question. I would say that usually you want to have a hard ask as like at max your third ask. So, or one out of every three. So if you're on Facebook, it's the third post and you're having program updates, and it doesn't have to be just your program updates, right? It could be industry news or in your topic area. That I actually think is really more impactful often, because it's not just saying, hey, look at me. It's also, here, look at all of the colleagues in my industry. On your timeline perspective, I see it that way too, because I am on my client's timeline all of the time, and so I'm reading through all of the content in a timeline fashion. Most people don't actually get it that way. Most people will see a singular article, so I'd say don't be afraid about that, like if it seems like it's repeating too much. On donation, like end of year giving, or we're coming up to Parkinson's Awareness Month in April, hit it hard. I mean, that is the time that you should be. So I would say every other is a fair, reasonable perspective. If you start getting pushbacks from your audience saying, hey, this is too much, I would say pull back a little bit, but don't stop. Because yes, people might be annoyed over a little bit, but it's like a fundraising or a donation drive for like KQED or anything. Like, that's the week that the people are going to be asking for money, and that's sort of what you expect. So that would be the difference. I would say 3-1 and then 2-1.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? I'm interested in just the repeat of a tweet. Like, you're putting it in all or any sort of social media. How many times is too much to post the same exact thing? Yeah, that's another great one that I wanted to get to, so thank you for following up. For Twitter, the half-life of a tweet is 15 minutes. So you could use the same tweet the next day, I would say. Like, I wouldn't use it right after, because then if someone does read through, you're like, wait, what? Why is it double posted? But you could use it that same day, the next day, or the next week. If you make slight tweaks, just like slight tweaks with a different image or one or two different words, I would say you could use it that same day. For Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, it's slightly longer, right? The half-life is a day. That's shrinking, but that's generally the assumed half-life. So I would say you could use it at the beginning of the week and then the end of the week if it's an important piece of content, or beginning of week and next week if it's not time limited. But feel free to use the same content. I think that's a really great way to schedule things out. Thank you.
Great. So I have one of my clients wants to establish itself as a national expert on their area of expertise. So how do they connect to journalists? I think the term speaker bureau gets thrown around, but I did some research recently. I'm like, I don't think that means what I think it means. Do you have any suggestions for how to be found by journalists who are writing stories on your topic?
Yes, and it starts with having a really strong point of view. There are a lot of people who want to be experts in a field who don't actually want to take a stance on that field. Journalists want to have a stance, right? If you are an expert on immigration, what do you think about the administration's new policies? you can't say, oh, well, I don't know. You have to have a point of view. So I would say start there. The second thing is just doing briefings, finding a lot of times journalists don't find you, you find journalists unless you are already a national expert. So sending emails saying, hey, we have this research report that's going out. We have this thought leader that we want you to talk to. I see you're writing an article on immigration. Here's someone you could talk to about this with a different perspective from what you've seen before. And then finally, I would say salon dinners are something that we've seen work really well. Invite journalists. It only usually works if you're local, which is unfortunate. But if you're going to be traveling, you can do this. Invite journalists to a dinner with you and someone you've worked with, right? If that's a volunteer or someone you've helped, it depends on sort of what your organization does. That's a really good way to get journalists aware of you. And they get free food and alcohol, and that usually makes journalists stay. I really hope they don't hate me for that.
Hi. You mentioned the importance of defining your audience, whether they're donors, whether funders, etc. One audience that you haven't mentioned is the audience of the client.
Yes.
So what are communication strategies to reach out the clients that you're serving, whether they're youth, seniors, LGBT, young girls, women, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for mentioning that, because that is, I mean, at the end of the day, that's what you do as a nonprofit. You help your clients. So I would say it's often the same strategy. It's often using social, especially if it's youth, or email blasts if you have their email. One of my friends works with youth that they're working on the digital divide. And so they're working with youth that don't have access to online tools. Then it actually gets to some really interesting, I'm going to say old school, but it's not old school methods, of like printing out flyers and actually going to community centers and, reaching people where they are. So I would say it depends on who your clients are, again, but reaching them where they happen to be rather than where you want them to be. So they're probably not going to be on your website unless you have services for them on your website, right? So if you're finding them in communities, going and outreaching to that community, leaving flyers, leaving posters, this comes to the, do you have 15 stacks of boxes in your office? Or are those flyers actually being used in that in a center or a community center?
Hi, I work for an organization that has both earned and contributed revenue streams, and we find sometimes there's competition between those revenue streams for communication messages. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas or strategies or resources to help organizations manage those messages a little more effectively.
And by that you mean you run programs and get revenue streams from those programs while also getting donor revenues, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
So for sometimes it can be really competing messages. Like, we're doing this great thing, aren't we so wonderful? And also, can you give us some money because we're really poor? Those two messages oftentimes can be.
Yeah. So I think, again, it gets back to this overarching narrative of integrated communications, and it's finding where those two streams connect and really communicating around that. So if it's, hey, we're doing really great work, but we need more funding so we can continue to do this really great work, that could be one. Or if you give discounted rates for certain of your programs through your other fundraising other streams of revenue. It could be, hey, we can't continue to give this scholarship, or we want to give a scholarship if you donate, right? So it's how do they work together? The other thing is there are going to be some times when one just wins out over the other. And I think it's difficult because we want to talk about all of the great work what we do, but we need money to continue to do that great work, right? So I would say there are times just that you want to talk about one over the other. Just make sure to balance those times. So often what we'll see is program directors will be like, hey, we have these programs going on, it'll be great. And the fundraiser will say, hey, we actually need this. So do one and one. Say, hey, last month we talked about this. We know it's important. This month we're going to be talking about that. It doesn't have to be monthly. It can be weekly or biannually, whatever you want to do. But just try and balance those communication streams.
How do we cultivate social media usage in donors that don't already have social media? And if our donors are on the older side of things, like how does that fit with who they are?
So I'm actually going to turn that back around at you and say, why do you want them on social?
I think because our donor base now is a lot older, and our kids are using social media, so we want them to see what our kids are posting and putting on there. So, but our donors don't usually have, Facebook and things like that.
Right. And that's a big challenge. I would argue that you don't need all of your donors or all of your audiences to be on social. It's a nice to have. But there are ways to send those either through email saying, hey, we have these 3 blogs that were written by our clients or our kids. Would you like to check them out? And sending an email blast that way. It's going to be really hard to get someone who isn't on social media and doesn't want to be on social media onto social media. And I would say that for a nonprofit that is strapped for resources, it's not where you should spend your resources. Now, there may be a directive, right? There might be a reason you're doing that I don't know, and I'm happy to talk after about that. But it doesn't make the most sense to try and force someone to be on social if they're not already there and they don't want to be. There are other ways to reach them. You could even integrate those stories that your kids are sending into your yearly mailer or monthly mailer, whatever you do there.
Hi. So as social media increasingly goes to pay to play, do you have recommendations that you give to the folks that you work for if we're lucky enough to have some kind of a budget to put towards promoting certain posts and that kind of thing about sort of what the current state of return on investment is in Facebook, Twitter? I was really happy to hear about the nonprofit grants on AdWords. Thank you for that. But, do you have like an overview you can give of where you would suggest money goes if we do have money to put into that?
Yes. Before I get there, I do want to say it's not all horrible, right? Like it's not all bad. There are other ways to reach people on social. One of which is employee advocacy or getting your clients to work on to share your content, which expands your reach and gets you a higher ROI. On where you are, what channels are you on?
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I think needs to be dusted off.
Yeah. So if you're looking for donations, I would say Facebook is where you want to go. There are really easy ways to advertise with Facebook, like a $25 donation, like advertisement, can actually increase your reach exponentially and sort of get you those click-throughs. Now, of course, as you get more money to spend, you'll get it's sort of like money in, money out, right? You need some amount of money. So I would say Facebook for donations. Twitter will get you a higher audience just because of the way their audience network works. I love Twitter personally as a platform. I use it mainly. A lot of people don't like it, but it has a higher reach, and their ad targeting is more for awareness than donations. So it's more getting people to know about you than actually giving you money, I would say. AdWords is, especially if you could use a Google AdWords grant, amazing. Like, it's amazing for donations. It takes longer, so it's like a higher investment cost, but it actually works. It's a better method over the long term. And then, of course, mixing them all together works really well. So I tend to advise that. I would also say start low with budgets. Don't blow all your budget at once, but test. Like, where did it actually work? So run like a 1-month test for $500 on each platform if you can, and then see which one worked out better, which one drove more traffic to your site, which one drove more donations.
LinkedIn bills itself as a professional networking social media tool.
Yes.
And so I've been reluctant to post on it. What kinds of messages are appropriate for LinkedIn?
Yes. LinkedIn is also interesting because Microsoft bought LinkedIn. So if you're not a fan of Microsoft, you might not be a fan of LinkedIn. I like it. I think it's really effective. Messaging that works really well on LinkedIn. Donor messaging. A lot of donors happen to be on LinkedIn because a lot of donors are professionals with a certain amount of net worth, and that tends to be people who are on LinkedIn. Recruitment messaging, if you're hiring, or if you're looking for volunteer coordinators, an amazing place to put information. And then just general corporate, not corporate, but organizational messaging. So what you do, who you are, works well too. I would say program specifics, depending on the program, can get mixed results. So I would say stick with donor messaging, recruitment, and higher level, sort of this is who we are.
Well, it seems like folks might be done with questions, but I have
please.
Just a couple of ending questions for you before we wrap up. I'm interested in just, you've been a wealth of information. Thank you. I don't know how everyone else feels, but I feel like you've really brought a lot of, insights into how we should be running communications. I would like to follow up on something that was said earlier, which I thought was a really good question. That was, around, does earned revenue versus donations. So to me, it also, the idea of balancing is great. The other question I'd have around that, it made me think about program versus overall brand, and how one balances the needs of a program versus the overall brand of the organization, and if you had any thoughts on how to do that.
Yeah, so a lot of organizations have programs that are branded differently, right? It'll be a specific organization with a brand. So to talk about 2041, which was the Arctic Advocate, their name is 2041. Their program that we were helping them on was the South Pole Energy Challenge. So branding those two together is a little complex. I would say generally have your brand name be somewhere in your program. So it doesn't have to be, this organization : program, but have it be on your collateral that is about that program, so that you all know it always comes back up to you. And also, the more important thing, rather than just visual branding or having your name somewhere on collateral, is having that story come through. So making sure that your story comes through what your program is. I work with AnitaB.org, which runs the world's largest annual conference for women in technology, and it's like 18,000 people now, and it helps. They're an advocate for women in technology. So they started hosting this conference to talk about the challenges and successes that women have made in the field of technology. It's huge now. It's amazing. But the conference name is the Grace Copper Celebration. The story, though, that they tell throughout it is the same story. And so making sure that your story and your narrative comes through whatever programs you're running is critical to having that sort of alignment.
Great, thank you. So one last question. Again, wealth of information. Thank you for your time and all of your insights. Just how would you, what publications or how can people continue to stay up on what is happening in the communications field? Do you have any particular blogs or other areas that you would think, hey, you should be really following either this thought leader or this blog, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the nonprofit side, two that I really like are Nonprofit Times and Stanford Social Innovation Review. BSR also has some really good stuff. On the communication side, which is where I spend looking at a lot, I particularly like Adweek and Ad Age. For social media, there's a site called Social Media Examiner, which is one of the top social media sites. It doesn't look great. It's kind of like Craigslist or Reddit in that way, but it actually has really good information. There's also Social Media Times. On general communications, PR Week is a great one, as is, oh wow, it just floated out of my head. PR Week is a great one, and I forgot the last one I was going to say.
Well, if you think of it, we can post it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we just want to thank everyone for their time today, and I wanted to thank DER for being in partnership with us on this program. We'll close with a couple of announcements, and then everyone can feel free to stay and come up and ask Aiden their questions on their own, too. Thanks. Sure. So the question of what do we have coming up at Foundation Center, I would just like to highlight one program we have next week that we're doing on risk management. It sounds very boring. It sounds like a spinach program, but believe me, it's spinach souffle. The person we have coming is really amazing, and she's really going to talk through, what are some of those scenarios, and I've heard her speak before, and she actually makes what you would think would be a very dry topic really interesting and really brings home the importance of making sure that your house is in order. So I would recommend that. That is next Wednesday from 10 to 11 a.m.
Fantastic. Everybody get your spinach souffle. I want to thank the Foundation Center for hosting us at the site today. Thank you so much. And for Aiden, what a wonderful talk. A lot of really good, actionable information. So we talked about data and measurement. So we like to model good behavior. So we collect a survey after every event, and that has already been emailed to everyone who registered for the event. If you have a smartphone, we ask that you fill it out right now before you even leave. And if you don't have a smartphone, it'll be in your email inbox when you get back. If you could fill that out, that's terrific. And we have an upcoming event as well. Katie Brown from Armanino is going to be talking about the Trump tax cuts, implications for your organization. And that's going to be on April 13th. All the information is on the DER website at dersf.org. So if you'd like, you can stay and network with your peers in the community. And that's it for today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
One more thing, everybody. One more thing before you leave. We're actually planning another event that's going to be talking about Google Analytics and dashboards, and I'm really trying to figure out what you want to know so that I can work with our speaker on that. So if you have any thoughts about Google Analytics, burning questions, please let me know. You can send an email to president@dersf.org. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks.